important aspect. I mean, we can't say a claim is not a claim when it is a claim, or we can't say it is a claim when it's not a claim. We have to work within the boundaries, and as long as we can get away with it, then that's fine.
Okay. All right. Good to know. Well, we do use Scott Winston, so we should be good.
Yeah.
Good to know. Okay, let's start because we're now live, and we don't want to give away all the secrets all at once. We want to leave something for people to find out later. All right. So the question is like this. We as Jewish people, we follow the Torah. The Torah commands us at times to do strange and difficult things. And I've said this numerous times. There are some people throughout history that have believed that the Torah gave us so many commandments. Some of them are they're not practical and they're impossible for anybody to achieve. And therefore, they believe that God was playing a trick on the Jewish people. Oh, they believe that there's God. If you were to think of one of the most difficult laws or ideas within the Torah, you would probably say it's this concept. What's the concept? Love your fellow as yourself. Now, I struggle at times to possibly love myself, which is possibly something that I should work on. But I certainly don't struggle to take care of myself in general. And that if I were to struggle taking care of myself would become through sheer laziness. But I do struggle to take care of others at times. So how could it be possible that the Torah expects me to love my fellow as myself? That's our discussion of today. This is a central theme within all of Jewry because it will affect all of our interactions between our fellows, between our fellow Jews. It will affect all our interactions, all our human interactions with this knowledge. And this is a totally different perception on all of Jewry. So I want to show you the source first. Let's start off with the source. So if you look over here, this is Vayikra, the parsha of Leviticus, chapter 19, as you can see on the screen. This is the beginning of the portion of Kedoshim. It says as follows. The Lord spoke to Moshe saying, what does the God says? Tell the Jewish people, tell the entire congregation of the Jewish people, which is rare, and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Now let's look in Rashi for a moment. It says as follows. Speak to the entire congregation of the children of Israel. This teaches us that this passage was stated in the assembly of the entire congregation of Israel, because most of the fundamental teachings of the Torah are dependent on it. They're encapsulated in this passage, Torah, Kohanim, Vayikra Rabbah. So we're learning that what is going to be stated in this chapter of the Torah, this discussion between God and Moshe, in what he wants to tell the Jewish people, it's rare that it says, usually it says, Daber el Bnei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people. Over here it says, Daber el Kol Adat Bnei Yisrael, speak to all of the Jewish people. So therefore what we understand is that all the laws that we're about to enumerate in this chapter are going to be essential and fundamental. So you shall be holy. We talk about sexual morality, and we're going to talk about respecting your mother and father, keeping the Torah, keeping Shabbat, etc. Each of these are important and fundamental, bringing the sacrifices, how it should be done. And then there's the certain sins if the sacrifices are not done properly. Then there's about leaving charity for the poor. It's something called paya, and then there's something called peret, leaving off the certain sheaths and parts of wool that have been lost. stealing, don't deny falsely, don't lie, don't swear falsely, profaning God's name, do not oppress your fellow, don't rob, make sure you pay your workers straight away, don't curse a deaf person, don't put a stumbling block in front of a person. I'm just going through these relatively quickly just so that you get the general idea of what type of laws are included in these fundamental laws. It goes on to say you shall not commit any injustice, you have to not be biased in judgment, don't be a gossip monger. We'll talk about that another time, hopefully. And this is where we're going to get into our discussion. Okay. So now we want to discuss so look in chapter 17. It starts off as follows: a fundamental law. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. Okay. First and foremost, don't hate your brother in your heart. So even holding a grudge or a feeling of hatred against your fellow man is forbidden. It's against the Torah. It's a transgressing a negative commandment. That's how strict the Torah is. Then it says like this: you shall surely rebuke your fellow, but you shall not bear a sin on his account. Now, some people are very good at the first part. You shall surely rebuke your fellow. Some people find that easy. Some people are professional rebukers. I would call them the opposite of professional rebukers. These are the worst rebukers. These are the most unsuccessful rebukers. These are the people that whenever anybody does something wrong, they think that it's their role in life to tell you off. You all know who I'm talking about. You all have met some type of person like this. If you go to some type of synagogue, or there's always those people that believe that they have to be, but that's the wrong thing. They think that they're professional rebukers. They're the opposite of a professional rebuker. Because it says, but you shall not bear a sin on his account. Now, you would think that the basic understanding of this means that if you see somebody doing something wrong, if you don't rebuke them, you are held responsible for the sin that they transgress. You would think that. But if you go on, you will see that that is not what it necessarily means. Look, it says, but you shall not bear a sin on his account. In the course of your rebuking, says Rashi, of your fellow, do not embarrass him in public. So there's one important condition. There's a commandment to rebuke your fellow. But condition number one is make sure you don't embarrass that person. And by the way, yesterday was passing of another great rabbi, unfortunately, Rabbi Abraham Twersky. I'm sure many of you have heard or read the books or heard a lecture by Rabbi Abraham Twersky, one of the great scholars of our times, a clinical psychiatrist, a lecturer, rabbi, lots of great things. He was in Australia numerous times. I once read from him something really powerful. He said that when you are rebuking somebody, he says the worst thing you can do is embarrass them. He says once you've embarrassed somebody, you have lost all hope. And he said, most important to remember that when you feel the need to discipline your children, and this is a really difficult one, make sure that there's no embarrassment involved. And therefore, if you have to tell your children off, do it in the most private and pleasant way possible. It doesn't make an exception over here to whether the person is an adult or a child. In the words of Rabbi Twersky that I remember, he said one of the most damaging things that you can do to your fellow human being, and including a child of your own, is to embarrass them. Embarrassing our fellows. And of course, sometimes we do it innocently. We don't expect it. We don't realize it. But being mindful of it is extremely important, that we don't embarrass people. So that's condition number one. If there's going to be even the slightest doubt that you might embarrass them, then don't do it. Don't do it. Number two is, before it says you don't hate them. If you have any ill feelings towards that person, you have no space telling them off. Okay? Because first it says you have to get rid of hate. Then it says you can rebuke. And that's on condition you don't bear sin, you don't embarrass them. But that's just half the puzzle. Let's look at the next verse, and there's obviously a direct connection with the next verse. It says further, not only shall you not hate your fellow, lotikam. Lotikom means do not take revenge. We're not to take revenge. Not only that, even if you don't hate them, but you bear a grudge. Now I know for us, it's like what? The Torah really cares how we feel. The Torah does care how we feel. The Torah doesn't want us even to bear a grudge against the members of your people. We're not allowed to bear a grudge. Now, if you're going to look at what it means to bear a grudge, let's look over here in Rashi again. It says as follows. You shall neither take revenge. For example, what's the difference between revenge and bear a grudge? He says to him, lend me your sickle. And the latter replies, no. The next day, the latter says to him, lend me your axe. He says to him, I will not lend it to you, just as you did not lend it to me. This constitutes revenge. Because you didn't lend it to me, I'm not going to lend it back. That's revenge. So what does it mean to bear a grudge? He says, for example, he says to me, lend me your axe. And the latter replies, no. The next day, the latter says to him, lend me your sickle. Now listen to this. This is very interesting. Now, if he says to him, here it is for you. I am not like you, who did not lend me. This constitutes bearing a grudge. For he keeps the hatred in his heart, even though he does not take revenge. So you may think to yourself, I'm such a good person. Look at me. He didn't do it. He wasn't good to me. So therefore, I'm not allowed to take revenge. I'm going to be the good person. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to lend him my sickle. Right? But if in your mind you're saying that, especially if you actually verbalize it, you are actually transgressing a negative commandment of lo sitor, do not bear a grudge. You're bearing a grudge. So what does the Torah expect from us? If somebody wrongs you and then they ask you for a favor, how easy is it for you to do a favor to somebody that just wronged you? You would say it's close to impossible. It's really difficult. As human beings, if somebody wrongs you, they do something against you, and they go ask for the very thing that you had asked of them, the normal thing to do would be nekama, revenge. The very least a good person would do is they would at least say, held a grudge. Says the Torah, even that you shouldn't do. Now, what does it say next? How's that possible? The Torah says as follows. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha ani Hashem. I am the Lord your God. But what does it say about I am God? Love your fellow as yourself. So you thinking, hold on a second, it's not possible. I can't not bear a grudge to someone that's done something wrong to me, and now he wants something from me. They say, okay, that's only because you don't love them as you love yourself. But what happens if one day you do something wrong? One day you do something wrong, you mess up. The very next day, you're going to say to yourself, listen, yesterday you were walking down the street and you tripped. You weren't watching where you're going. Because of that, you tripped. And you tripped over your shoelaces and you hurt your arm, your elbow. You're not going to say, you know what? Because of that, I'm now going to be tying up and giving wax to my foot. I'm not going to be taking care of my feet because they made my arm hurt because they made me fall. You're not going to say that. That would be ridiculous. What do? The next day, you continue treating your feet as they are yourself. So what happened? How come when you did something wrong, you were able to continue life and treating your feet good and treating your arm good and treating everybody good? But when it comes to somebody else, when they do something wrong to you, you struggled. You weren't able to do the favor. What's the answer? Because when you see the other person, it's another person. But when it's yourself, when you did something wrong to yourself, oh, you're looking to overlook it. It's myself. What do you mean? I have to take care of myself. I'm looking to overlook my faults. Right? So when you treat there's a double standard over here. For everybody else, there's one standard. Or for family, there's one. But everybody else, there's another standard. How can this be? So now, I don't know exactly. Over here, he doesn't go on to saying what it says, Ani Hashem. I wanted to say what I think it says. I haven't looked into it. I just noticed these words here now. I am God. And I think what it's saying is that what you're thinking, okay, fine. So I've just explained to you that the way you're not going to hold a grudge is by loving your fellow as yourself. But how do you love somebody else the same way you love yourself? So what is the answer? Ani Hashem. I'm God. I give you the power to do such a thing. If you trust in God, you believe in God, you'll be able to do it. In other words, God gives you the strength to be able to do something as crazy as this. Now look over here. Have you all heard the song? Amar Rabbi Akiva, Amar Rabbi Akiva, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You heard that song? Yeah? Okay, so this is one of the first songs. What is that song? Look inside what Rashi says over here. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your fellow as yourself. Rabbi Akiva says this is the fundamental, all-inclusive principle of the Torah. Who's saying this? Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest scholars in all of Jewish history. You say to him, what's the most important principle in all of Torah? This principle. Hold on a second. Not only is it something that seems to be impossible for most of it to achieve, says Rabbi Akiva, Zeklal Gadol B'Torah, this is the great principle of the Torah. Now, who are we fooling? Who are we kidding? If somebody were to tell me that something was difficult in the Torah, then that's this. This is what's difficult in the Torah. This is the most difficult thing. Okay, so before I go on, I want to just pause for a moment. If anybody has any quick questions or comments based on what we're actually spoken about. I don't want to get totally derailed, but I just want to make sure that everything's clear.
Yeah, I sure have a question for you.
Okay.
And that is, if somebody is a bully and does do you a lot of harm, you try to explain that the person is damaging and injuring and harming you. There's no apology, and the person repeats their behavior a lot of times. So there is no hope that that person will improve. Should you say, I keep being nice to that person, or should you say, I ignore that person, I don't want that person in my life to avoid more offenses?
Okay, I would definitely say the latter, that you should try to keep that person out of their life if they're making your life miserable.
But you should love every other Jew.
It doesn't mean that you should accept abuse. It's two different things. And we'll discuss that. It doesn't mean that you should accept abuse. It doesn't mean that you should accept anybody behaving incorrectly. It's two separate things. There's the one way is the way you perceive them. You should still try to perceive them as the way you perceive yourself, as a person that is a good person. Doesn't mean that you should be accepting abuse and you should be trampled upon, because that's not doing that person a favor either. It's never doing the best thing that you can do for such a person in that circumstance is probably to keep far away from them, because that person themselves is obviously not in control of themselves, and they need the guidance, or they need to know that what they're doing is not okay. It's like one of the things that they say about druggies, that some people that are on drugs can be helped, but some people are so badly on drugs they have lost all control, and the only way that they can help them is by reaching rock bottom. And they encourage people that have reached such a state not to help these people. Why? Because as long as you're helping them, they have something left to hold on to, right? So they convince people, don't let them into your house. a mother should send this child away. Why? Because it's the only way your child can reach rock bottom. Yes, your child might pass away in the process, but you know what? The child has a bigger chance of surviving if you throw them out at that point than if you keep them in, and at least they feel like, you know what, it's still okay. I still have a place of safety net. They have to reach such a point that they have no safety net. That's what's that word? What's the word for that? I'm trying to think. Tough love. It's called tough love. When you have to love somebody, but you have to give them the boot. And that's the challenge. If a parent at some point is able to say, listen, I love my child, but the best thing for them right now is not to be here. And it should still be done with love. My child is being abusive, or my child needs to get over the drugs, or whatever the situation is. That's the healthiest thing that you can do for the child, and probably for yourself as well. But that's not hatred. That's actually love. That's the only way you'll eventually save the child. So I would say the same thing. By accepting abuse from people, you're not doing anybody a favor. You're not doing yourself a favor, and you're certainly not doing the abuser a favor.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So thank you for clarifying that. But I want to go less practical than what Fritz just said. And I'm hoping what Fritz said, it's not so practical. But less talking about practical, let's talk more about the theory behind the concept. Now, if you were to study this concept in its plain sense, it makes sense in a sense that, yeah, if I were to love others as myself, I would make sure that I have a complete love for them. I would never hold a grudge against them, no matter what they do to me. Fine. But practically, is it even possible to love somebody else like yourself? Yeah, I can love my children like I love myself. I could possibly love my spouse or my parents or my siblings. But it doesn't say that. It doesn't say family members. It says your fellow. Your fellow refers to any random Jew somewhere around the world. How am I supposed to love that person the way I love myself? That's the question. So let's look at a few other sources within the Torah. It's going to be a little bit smaller, but I was looking for some sources, and a bunch of them I came across in one sheet from Chabad.org. It says as follows. Okay, so Rashi already mentioned that this section of the Torah is a fundamental. It was said to the whole community because it's an essential. Now look at what it says about rebuking over here. Talmud in Yevamot. Said Rabbi Ilah in the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon. Just as it is a mitzvah for a person to say what will be accepted, it is a mitzvah to refrain from saying things that will not be accepted. You shall not bear a sin on his account. So over here, the Talmud gives us another interpretation to what it means to not bear a sin on his account, which means to say that when you say things, only say things that people can accept. If you're going to rebuke somebody and you know that the person's going to get all upset at you when you rebuke them, you're wasting your time. Don't do that. Not only you're not doing that, you're actually doing something worse. So the first thing you want to make sure is that you actually are going to be accepted. And if you can't do that, then you're making a big mistake. So let's look at one or two other interesting sources. The Jerusalem Talmud says, how does one avoid acting vengefully? One should think, if a person were cutting meat and the knife cut his hand, would that hand cut the first hand in return? What's it saying? It's saying as follows. If you hurt yourself, you're not going to take if you, God forbid, you're busy cutting meat and you cut your finger, you're not going to take the arm with the other hand and then go chop the hand that cut you. That would be a stupid thing to do. Why? Because by hurting the other arm, you're hurting yourself. You're hurting the same person. So therefore, what is he saying? Something really powerful over here. What he's saying that in truth, we are all one and the same person. And the only reason why you would get angry at that person is because you think that they are somebody separate to us. And this is one of the fundamental concepts within Hasidus, that we consider our fellows to be somebody outside of me. If you were to say, hold on a second, that person did something against me. If I go and take revenge, or I go and do something against them, you know who I'm hurting? I'm hurting myself. By saying that, what we're acknowledging is that we are one and the same person. Look over here for a moment. There's the famous story of Hillel. What did Hillel say? What was the story? The story was that Hillel, that there was a guy that wants to convert, and he goes to Shammai. What did Shammai say to him? He chased him out, right? He comes to Hillel. He says, teach me the whole Torah while I'm standing on one foot. What's Hillel's reply? The famous story of Hillel. This is probably one of the most famous Talmudic stories. His reply is, okay, no problem. You want to know the whole Torah? I'll tell you the entire Torah. Stand on one foot. He says, don't do unto others what you don't like done to yourself. That's it. And the guy said, that's it? I could put my foot down. What do you mean? You can go on. You got more time. You go on, more time. No. That's it. Think about that. He says, V'idach pirusha. Now, there's a slight subtle difference between what Rabbi Akiva said, that this principle is the main principle of the Torah, to what Hillel says. I'm not going to get into the technical difference, but when you listen to Hillel and he says, you want to know the whole Torah? Don't do unto others, you don't like unto yourself. What is he saying? What is he actually saying? He's saying exactly what it said over here. The entire Torah is there to teach us one thing. You and Leon and Irene and Fritz and Noach and myself and Ruvain and anybody else, any other person throughout the world are actually me. We're the same person. That's what he's saying. Because the reason, what the Torah is trying to achieve is one thing, to make us recognize that we and our fellow are the same person. So let's stop for a moment and figure out, okay, great. So you're telling me that the way I'm going to stop hating other people or holding a grudge or taking revenge or inappropriately rebuking them is by one thing, recognizing that me and my fellow are one and the same. We're connected. Does that satisfy you? Because the problem with that is that we haven't yet understood what does it mean? How could we be connected? How are we the same? And this is where we built out a beautiful picture, but we are missing the understanding of the concept. And this is where we would need something called Chasidut Chabad. What Chabad means is intellect. And the Hasidus will try to take the law and try to make it understandable, connectable to us on a logical level. Now, I mentioned when Fritz was asking this question, I think it was last Tuesday that you asked this question, that led us to the shir. How do we actually achieve this? And I mentioned that there's numerous sources within Hasidus that talk about this. I'm going to go through several sources, but I want to start with what the Baal Shem Tov says, and then we will go on to what Chabad Hasidus, because the Baal Shem Tov introduces the concept in a generic way in what's called Chasidut. The Baal Shem Tov was the founder of Chassidut. And the Alter Rebbe will take it to the next step, making it far more logical. And you'll be able to see that within the text. Says over here.
I think you lost us, Rabbi.
Is anybody touching my mouse?
No, I can hear you again.
Okay, sorry.
Not to worry. Don't take it personal. No grudges. No, can't hear you. Still no sound is coming through.
You know, looks like internet. Maybe it's reconnecting now. Yeah, just give it a minute.
Others physically.
The internet is going in and out, Rabbi. Could you go back 2 minutes of what you said, please? Is it anything I said, or is it the internet?
I reckon it's the internet.
Hello? Can you hear
Hi.
me now?
Yeah, long time no
I
see.
continued talking until I realized I was offline. Did
Yeah.
you know? I don't
We
know.
won't take it personal.
I was just talking to myself, but just look, I thought you guys were still there.
It's good company.
My apologies.
We were here, but we couldn't hear a thing you said.
Okay. So my apologies. Let's go back to where I was. I had to. Let me do this again. Okay. Let's look over here at Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov for a moment. Okay, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidic movement, says to love your fellow is to love God. Okay, we're now understanding why it is so important. It says like this: you are children unto the Lord your God. So what does it mean? Something really powerful. Who loves a father loves his children. When one loves one's fellow, one loves God. For one's fellow contains within himself a part of God. Okay, this is from the Baal Shem Tov. By loving one's fellow, the innermost part of him, one loves God. So what this actually means is as follows. What the Baal Shem Tov is coming to teach us over here is that it says in the Torah that B'ni B'char Yisrael, you the Jewish people are my children. So therefore we understand that just like if you love somebody, you're going to love their children, right? And therefore, by loving your fellow Jew, you're really loving God, because we and God are one. So we are one with God. As we said in the Pasuk, I am God. Let's look over here for a moment. Let's try to understand this on a slightly deeper level, and you'll bear with me for a moment as we get a bit more technical. This is from chapter 32 of the Tanya. He says like this: how do you achieve what we've been trying to achieve? The Torah, loving your fellow as yourself. He says something really, really powerful, in my opinion. He says, the first way is to say, to view one's body with scorn and contempt, and to find joy in the joy of your soul alone. Now, what this means is not that your body is bad. Most of us look at the main aspects of ourselves. You know, you look down a person, as soon as you're walking down the road, you meet a person for the first time, we as human beings generally make a judgment of them immediately. We think that we've already kind of worked them out. We've already made a decision about them. You know, are they friendly? Are they nice? Are they outgoing? Are they this? Are they that? And sometimes some of those perceptions may be correct, some of them. He says that when we look at human beings and we make a judgment on them just by seeing them, seeing the way they look, you're making your first major mistake. We're judging the book by its cover. Every person has a cover to them. If the designer put a great catchy picture on the cover, then we may be tempted to read the book, but the book will likely be horrific. Some great books have terrible covers. Some great people never came in beautiful boxes. There was there's this famous story from the Talmud of a rabbi who was one of the smartest rabbis at the time. He went up. He was once traveling, and while he was traveling, he came across a particularly unpleasant looking person. And he said to the person, you know, something like, how is it possible to be as unpleasant looking as you are? Isn't it like difficult? And the person said to him, you are a rabbi and you speak like this. Don't you recognize that my looks come from God? And there's more details to the story, but the nutshell of the story was the rabbi who suddenly had this epiphany, awakening, and realization that, wow, what had he just said? And he begged this person for forgiveness. And the person made certain conditions about whether he would forgive him and how he would do it. But his first and foremost thing is like, it's time for you to stop judging things superficially. Now, this is one of the hardest things. The Torah wants us to try to judge things not superficially, not by their outer look, but by the inner look. So he says the first and most important thing, that you should find joy in soulful things, in spiritual things, not in bodily things. He says, what does this cause you? This is the direct and easy path to fulfill the mitzvah of you shall love your fellow as yourself. Why? L'chol nefesh, with regard to every Jew, both great and small in spiritual stature. Now, how does that help you? If you look at the soul as the most important and you get your joy from your soul, but not from your body, he says that's the way you're going to achieve this impossible task of loving your fellow as yourself. Why is that? How is that even possible? So he answers. He says, because your body is going to be despicable to loathsome. In other words, not going to make himself all into his body and start thinking about how great his body, how beautiful his body is, how great his body is. He'll recognize that, hold on a second, beyond that body, there's a soul. V'nefesh v'ruach, and that soul is what's the main person, which I'm not looking at. I'm going to look past the body and I'm going to say, who knows the greatness of that soul? That soul may look despicable, the body may look despicable, or the person may even at times act despicable. But no matter what type of person, he has a soul, and that soul is one with God. It's really rooted in the true God.
Rabbi,
So-
can I ask you something? Or should I ask it later?
You can ask it, and I'll decide if she'll answer you later or not.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I claim, right or wrong as I may be, to be a professional salesperson. When somebody walks into the shop, you make a judgment how to say good morning. It will be either good morning, good day, hi, how do you do, whatever it may be. So instantly you look at the person and you make a judgment. The eyes are a reflection of the soul. So if you're careful and you have experience and an ability to look at people not for beauty, but for character trait, do you say you shouldn't look at the cover of the book because that's inappropriate? Or do you say, if you do it carefully and you look for the right attributes in the eyes, in the body language, but whatever issues give away a character trait, then it's okay?
The answer to your question is, I would say yes. Yes, then it is okay. As in, the point is, I don't know if I have an exact answer to a question, but the main point that we're trying to say over here, and hopefully it does answer your question, is that we shouldn't be judging people superficially. And even when there's two elements to this. There's the way the person looks. You know, some people are attractive physically and some people aren't. Fact. Okay, I'm not going to argue with it. If somebody doesn't look pretty, they don't look pretty. Somebody that looks pretty is beautiful. That's it. You know, it's attractive. Great. But that's not the person. The point is, who do you consider the person? You could say, well, that person has a good looking body, but that's not the person.
Mm.
There's another thing, that's another element, and this we go getting another thing is a person's actions or what a person says. And this is where it gets even more difficult. We tend to judge people based on the way they act or the way they speak. And he's telling us even that is a superficial element. The way they act or the way they speak is also superficial and not who they really are. That's not the true person. It's definitely more revealing than the way the person looks physically. So if you have a child, for example, and why I bring up children is because children are our responsibility, or our family, a spouse, a sibling, and they're acting a particular way, the true way, and you don't appreciate the way that person's acting. You could say, well, that person's a bad person. That's a bad Jew. Torah Hasidus doesn't believe in such a thing. They say people could do bad things, but they can't be bad Jews. Deep down, in truth, not even deep down, but in essence, that person is good. So he's going to say it like that, like this. Now, we spoke about different types of souls earlier in the Tanya, which we didn't start to discuss tonight. We're discussing that in the Shabbos morning shir, if you want. He says like this. We are all actually all equal, and we all have one Father. And that's why the Jewish people are called Achim. Hi, Hazel, welcome.
Oh, sorry.
No worries, welcome.
I was coughing. Sorry. I've been on for a while. I was listening on Facebook. I was watching on Facebook, and then I decided to come in and sit here.
Okay,
Sorry.
beautiful. Good to see you. No, good to see you. I can't see who's on Facebook usually because there's too many screens to follow. But I know that a few couple. All right, so good to see you. So it says like this, on account of this common root. So it says like this, the one God that all of Israel are called brothers, right? So we're all called brothers of each other in the full sense of the word. And not only figuratively in the sense of relatives or sibling parents. And let's look over here back in the Hebrew. Why is he using these English phrases? Because it says the Jewish people are called brothers. We have one. Baruchenu Avinu Kolanu Ke'achad. Our Father blesses us when we're all together. That's from the Sim Shalom. And it says, because we are all brothers. And the word mamash means that this is not something that is just an esoteric, mystical idea. This is in reality. This is the truth. We are really all one. Now, hold on a second. If we're all one, I'm not sitting in the same house. As Fritz says, I'm sitting in Sydney. We're not sitting together. We're not in the same part of the body. He says, so what divides us? How could you be one? What does it mean, one? One family? Even families have different bodies. What does one mean? So he says like this. We are divided. But there's two ways that we connect. Or we have two parts to us. We have our soul and our body. Remember, we started off by saying that we should consider our soul to be primary and our body secondary. The only reason why we're looking at the second fellow as a separated fellow is because we're having the superficial outlook, which is, hey, there's that gentleman over there, there's that lady over there, and there's me. And we're all different people. Great. But the truth is that we're seeing only a facade. It's not the truth. The truth is that we have a soul. And the soul is not dependent only on a body. The soul lives beyond the body. And from the soul's perspective, we are all one entity. It's only our bodies that separate us, but our souls are also the one thing. So if you remember when we discussed, I showed you from the Talmud, the brilliant mashal of a person that takes a knife and cuts himself while chopping meat. He doesn't take the knife in the other hand and cut his other arm back. Why doesn't he do that? Because that's stupid. You don't cut yourself on purpose and you don't take revenge against yourself. So we said, hold on a second, and the same thing's us. We're also one. But we had no understanding. We had no understanding of what that meant. Till came along the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya. He says, I'll explain to you what it means. This is what it means. It means that our souls are one and the same entity, not in theory, but in reality. We are actually one. We have the same source. We come from the same place. Now, the Alter Rebbe, we've now jumped to chapter 32 of the Tanya because this is where he focuses on this particular concept. But at the beginning of the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe emphasized something called the godly soul, the soul which tells us that all of our souls are a part of God. It's all one and the same thing. We have different ideas, we have different aspects and elements, and we each have our own uniqueness. But from our essence and our core, we're all the one and the same. So it's we're more connected than if we were Siamese twins, than if we were brothers, than if we were spouses, than if we were father and child. When a father and child, because at the end of the day, a father and child, a parent and a child, I should say, feel extremely connected, probably one of the closest and strongest connections we could find. But at the end of the day, they have two separate lives. They have two separate bodies. They're still differentiated by their bodies. But two Jews have the same soul. And of course, this would apply to the parent and the child as well. The essential bond between one Jew and the other, it's not just that we say that in theory, brothers, because God considers us all of his children. Beautiful. What a nice thing to say. No. It's not theory. He's saying if you were to look at our souls, you would see God sees our souls coming from the same place, really being part of one. Bodies, physical things are compartmentalized. Physical things come in different parts. They divide up into different entities. Spiritual things are not limited by one place and one time. Spiritual things exist in all different places. And therefore, while we each have our unique identity, but we're all part of one essential essence, which is all deeply connected. And it's just like the difference between one finger and another. This finger has one role, that finger has another role. A different role, different jobs within their lives. This finger wants me to go like this to explain the shear or the class, and this finger wants me to point inside whatever it is. This finger wants me to chop. Everyone has a different mission. But what do? We recognize that even though every part of my body has a unique role, it has its own identity, but altogether they make up one whole. The same thing is with us as Jewish people. We're all one whole. The only thing is that we sometimes appear to be, and we don't see that feeling of connectedness. But if we were to, by knowing this teaching, it teaches us this. It's only our exterior. It's only the fact that one person looks like a finger, the other one person looks like a toenail, but really they're the same person. We're all part of one conjoined, unique body entity of the Jewish people. It's a very, 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 very powerful statement that the Alter Rebbe has just taught us right now. So therefore, he says like this. Therefore, he says, there can be no true love and fraternity between those who regard their bodies as primary and their souls as secondary. Why? But only a love based on an external factor. Because you see yourselves as two separate entities. And therefore, you and that person are two separate beings. And the only reason why you'll love them is if you're going to be receiving something that they can give you, that you can't give by yourself. But if I consider myself the main thing, then I would not look at myself. Sorry, if we consider my soul the main primary being, I don't need something external in order to love them. I love them just because. I love them because they are me. Without them, I cannot be me. If one Jew is missing from the picture, then we are all lacking. It's like if a person will say, well, I'm getting annoyed at my toenails, so I'm going to chop him off. That's ridiculous. Why? Because you can't be you if you're missing your toenail. You won't be able to achieve whatever you'd be able to achieve. The same thing is with us as the Jewish people without your toe, without our other Jew, even as annoying as they may be, the only way we can fulfill our role is if we have them there too. And that's why he says, and that's what the Hillel, the elder, said, Zeu kol Torah kula. This is the entire Torah. Now this is the next statement. How could this be? Or as Hillel said, this is the great principle of the Torah. He says, and here he says something which is quite fascinating. And I don't have time to explain it in depth, but I want to bring it out. He says, what the basis and root and the purpose of the entire Torah is to elevate and exalt the soul above the body to God, the source and root of all worlds. It's an extremely powerful statement. You want to know what the whole purpose of all of Judaism, of all the creation, of all the thing? There's different ways of how we say it in Chassidus. He says it as follows over here. He says to elevate your soul above your body. Because as a person born into a human body, naturally you're drawn after your body. You naturally want to go after your body. You want to live as a body. He says, but your job and what the Torah is trying to help you is to recognize that your body's not. Let me ask you a question. For those men that put on tefillin, how much joy, physical pleasure do you get from putting on tefillin? What's more enjoyable? Having a geschmacka piece of sushi or a burger or tofu if you're a vegetarian or whatever it is that vegetarians like to eat, or whatever it is, or making some money, or doing something that is physically pleasurable, or doing something for your soul, or putting on tefillin. What's more enjoyable? So you'll say to me, what do you mean? It's more enjoyable to have a good piece of... how somebody's in the middle of work and you're going to say, okay, stop for a moment in work and put on tefillin. Why should I put on tefillin? I'll tell you why you should put on tefillin. Because the whole purpose of why you were created is to make your soul above your body. You busy worried about your body, stop for a moment, do something for your soul. Hold on, but I'm not going to get any benefit. You're right. Your body won't get benefit, but your soul will. So all these crazy little mitzvahs that we do, that we don't have any understanding of them, we get no benefit out of them from a physical level, but every single one of those are there to tell us and to remind us it's not about your physical pleasure. It's not about your physical benefit. It's all about your soul. To remind ourselves that yes, we're a body, we're going to take care of our body, but ultimately to make our soul the more important one. I should not be able to go a day without taking care of my soul, studying, putting on tefillin, lighting Shabbat candles, whatever it is that a soul needs. He says, and the second thing is, and also to draw down the infinite light of the Ein Sof on the community of Jewish people. In other words, this is the awesome infinite light of Jewish people, of God. So, meaning the fountainhead of the souls of all Israel, so that one God will resound within Israel, but only insofar as they are one united. So what he's saying is, the second point is we're trying to bring God, the infinite light, Ein Sof, which is the infinite light of God, into us, to reside with us as the Jewish people. There's only one way that he can do it, he says. He says the only way is if we are one and together, if we are conjoined, if we have unity. Why? Because what does he say? He says, but this indwelling of the light of the Ein Sof, it is impossible if there is disunity between the souls, God forbid. Why? For God does not dwell in imperfect, fragmented place. We want Jewish people. You want God to be with us as the Jewish people. There's only one way to achieve that, is Jewish unity. If we are severed, then we are imperfect. And if we are imperfect, we cannot house God. And I'm going to stop over here, as it says, and we say this in the Sim Shalom, Baruchenu Avinu Kulanu Ke'echad Bi'or Panecha. What it means, we say, bless our Father, all as one with the light of your countenance, indicating that in saying, Baruchenu Kulanu Ke'echad, when does God bless us? Blessing is God reside within us when we are all one, when we are one and together. That's how we do it. Okay. There's so much more that we can talk about on this topic, but I just wanted to at least point you out to these ideas. And with this, I hope that we have at least started the conversation in what the Torah means when it says that we can have a love for our fellow. Right? We started off with this question: how is it possible? What does it mean? We answered the way you're going to stop having revenge and stop holding grudges and love is through remembering that your fellow is yourself. And we asked the question, how is that possible? And the answer was, when we stopped making our main existence our body, but recognizing that our true and most important identity is our soul. When we do that, we recognize that just like one soul is deeply and connected and one with the other soul, and they're not two separate beings. And therefore, me and my fellow Jew are really one. And through that, we achieve the ultimate purpose. We need to create this Jewish unity. The only way we're going to do it is by elevating our souls above. Then we make our souls primary. That's the way we cause Jewish unity. Because when our souls are the main thing, then one soul and another soul are really one and the same. And when we are all together, God resides upon us. Okay, so that's our discussion for tonight. That's where I'll leave it off for now, but I would like to, first of all, thank everyone for coming, and everyone is welcome to leave to ever want, but anybody that would like to stay on and ask any questions is welcome. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Have a great night. And if anybody has any questions, feel free.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. Thank you, Fritz.
Thank you and good night. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
Leon and Irene.
Yes,
Noah,
Good-
Menachem. Hi, guys.
Hey,
Bye,
hey,
Hazel.
good to see
Let's
you.
see.
nice to see you too.
Nice to see you. Thank you for joining.
Bye.
Bye, Fritz. No doubt I'll see you at work.
It'll be nice.
Yeah. Bye,
It will be
Noah.
next week.
Bye,
It will be
Hazel.
next week. This week I
Okay.
can't.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye,
Thank
Hazel.
you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noah.
All the best.
Well,
Bye,
good
love.
night. Good night. Leon and Irene would love to see you on Friday night if you're interested. Come past again when you get a chance. Have a good night. Thank you so much.